Title: The Legacy Behind the Glass Room. The TSA agent's voice was crisp, clipped with artificial authority. "Step aside, ma'am." It was the kind of tone that didn't leave space for argument, just the cold echo of protocol slicing through the air like a blade. Monica Hamilton felt it before she even registered what was happening. The subtle shift in the terminal's energy, the way the crowd's attention seemed to tilt in her direction. She'd been walking side by side with her two children, laughing at something her daughter had just said, when the command halted her mid-stride. Others breezed through the checkpoint. A white businessman tapping his smartwatch. A teenage couple locked in their own universe. An elderly white pair shuffled through hand in hand. But Monica, dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit and flats, her tightly coiled hair swept into an elegant twist, was the only one singled out. Secondary screening. The sign read above the frosted glass room she was quietly ushered into. She knew the routine. It wasn't her first time. It wouldn't be her last. But this time was different. Not because of what they would find, but because of who she was. Or more precisely, who she was married to. 8 hours earlier, in their sun-drenched Buckhead kitchen, her husband, Everett Hamilton, kissed her goodbye. "I'll see you in Sedona," he whispered into her ear, pulling her close. Just a quick stop in Geneva for a business pitch, and then he'd meet them at the family resort by Thursday. The cologne Monica had gifted him for Father's Day lingered on his collar, cedar and smoked vanilla. 3 days, she murmured, holding him tighter than usual. Everett had built his empire from scratch. What began as a small local airstrip now operated as Hamilton Skyport, the nation's most lauded airport. But Everett remained intensely private. He rejected flash and avoided the spotlight. So private, in fact, that almost none of the 7,000 employees working under his name knew what he looked like. They certainly didn't know that his wife, an esteemed dean at Morehouse College, was the same black woman frequently flagged for random screenings at the very terminal that bore his name. Now, as Monica stood barefoot on the cold floor of the screening room, her arms extended in a practiced T-shape, she reminded herself not to clench her jaw. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, keeping her voice measured. "It's just protocol, ma'am," replied Officer Collins, a white woman in her early 30s, snapping on fresh gloves. Her badge reflected the fluorescent lights above. "TSA Officer Collins." Monica sighed. Through the blurred glass, she could see the shadows of her children, Kayla, 22, and Isaiah, 19, waiting just outside. She had told them to go ahead, but of course they refused. "Turn around, please," Officer Collins instructed, her tone firm but devoid of cruelty. Monica glanced at her wristwatch. Everett had gifted it to her on their 20th anniversary. Understated. Elegant. Classic. They still had 45 minutes before boarding, but it wasn't about time. It was about the principle. Everett would be furious, of course. Each time this happened, his reaction was the same. He'd schedule new diversity trainings, revise protocols, order fresh audits. But nothing ever changed. "May I check your carry-on now?" Officer Collins asked. Of course. Inside were her essentials: laptop, notes for a panel discussion, a book on academic leadership, a small velvet pouch. "What's in here?" the officer asked, tugging the drawstring. "Jewelry," Monica answered simply. Out came a diamond bracelet, sapphire earrings, and finally, a small golden pin shaped like a jet, etched with the Hamilton Skyport logo. Collins paused. Her brow furrowed. This is a Hamilton executive pin." "Yes," Monica replied. "May I ask how you came to possess it?" Before Monica could answer, the door opened. A tall black man entered in a TSA uniform, silver bars on his shoulders. His voice was calm but commanding. "Is there a problem here, Officer Collins?" "Supervisor Bryant," she replied quickly. "Just a routine check. But the passenger has a Hamilton executive pin." Supervisor Bryant looked to Monica. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Dr. Hamilton," he greeted warmly. "Hello, Malcolm," she replied with a faint smile. "It's been a while." Officer Collins blinked. "You two know each other?" "Dr. Hamilton was one of my mentors at Morehouse," Bryant said. "And she's just a passenger, trying to board a flight with her children." Monica nodded, gently but firmly. "Officer Collins, Dr. Hamilton is cleared. Return her belongings and escort her to her gate." "Our apologies for the delay," Bryant said. "But sir, the pin is not a restricted item," he finished for her. As her bag was zipped up and handed back, Bryant leaned in slightly. "If you'd like to file a complaint, I'll back it." Monica shook her head. Not this time. But inside, she was exhausted. Exhausted from being the only one. The only black woman in that classroom. The only one who had to remain composed when anyone else would have been allowed anger. She stepped out to find Kayla seething and Isaiah visibly deflated. "That's the third time this year, Mom," Kayla muttered. "Why do you let them do that?" "This is Dad's airport," Isaiah added. "Why isn't this fixed yet?" "We'll talk in Arizona," Monica said softly, though the truth was, she didn't know how to fix what she didn't control. Miles away, in a sleek glass conference room overlooking Geneva's skyline, Everett Hamilton ended a call mid-sentence. "Excuse me," he said curtly to the other executives. "We'll revisit this tomorrow." His phone was still in his hand. A text from Isaiah. They flagged Mom again. Secondary screening. Supervisor Bryant helped. "We made our flight." No further detail. No complaint from Monica. But it was enough. Everett turned to his assistant. "Book me on the next flight back. And get David on the line." 2 hours later, his private jet was in the air, the Atlantic spread wide below. Everett stared at a photo on his phone. Monica, Kayla, and Isaiah in Sedona last winter. Her smile still made his chest ache. This had to end. No more privacy at the cost of principle. No more silence. By the time Monica, Kayla, and Isaiah returned to Hamilton Skyport from Sedona 3 days later, something had changed. The airport was humming with a quiet buzz. Staff seemed unusually alert. Signs of new training sessions were posted everywhere. And at the center of the atrium, beneath a towering sculpture commissioned years ago, stood Everett Hamilton. He wasn't hiding anymore. Kayla spotted him first. "Is that Dad?" "He's not supposed to be here until tonight," Isaiah said, confused. Everett waved them over. "Come with me." In the administrative wing, Monica walked beside her husband silently. The tension between them unspoken but thick. In the boardroom, executives stood waiting, terminal directors, TSA supervisors, staff leaders. At the front, Everett gestured to his family. "For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, this is my daughter Kayla, my son Isaiah, and my wife, Dr. Monica Hamilton, Dean at Morehouse College." He let the silence settle before continuing. 3 days ago, my wife was selected for random screening, again. Not the first time. Likely not the last. But I'm done pretending that what happens here is separate from who we are. The room remained still. I've spent 15 years hiding behind merit and metrics. But if my wife can be searched in this building, with a Hamilton pin in her bag, and still treated like a threat, then something is broken. He looked directly at Officer Collins, seated near the back. Her face was pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Effective immediately, we are overhauling our protocols. Independent audits. Transparent reporting. Bias training for all. And one more thing," he paused, turning to Monica. "I will no longer remain anonymous." Hamilton Skyport would no longer be a name. It would be a face. A family. A value system. 3 months later, Monica stood under a banner that read, "The Hamilton Family Welcome Center." Security complaints had dropped 60%. Employee satisfaction reached record highs. Several other airports had reached out, asking to model their new bias prevention programs on Hamilton Skyport's example. Standing beside her husband, Monica finally felt visible. Not because of the title or the airport, but because her voice, long stifled, had sparked transformation. Everett leaned in, whispering, "You were right." She smiled. "We were right." Across the concourse, Officer Collins, now promoted and leading training sessions on implicit bias, nodded at Monica as they locked eyes. No longer adversaries. No longer strangers. Just two people trying, in their own way, to do better. And that, Monica thought, was the legacy worth leaving behind.